The sound of thundering hoofs tore through the peaceful afternoon air as Lillian Vance clutched her 3-month-old daughter tightly against her chest, her heart pounding wildly with each labored breath. The year was 1878, and what had begun as a routine journey to visit her sister in Alamosa, Colorado had turned into a desperate fight for survival when 4 bandits spotted her traveling alone in the small wagon. "Faster," she whispered urgently to her exhausted horse, knowing the poor animal couldn't possibly outrun the men gaining ground behind her. The wheels of her wagon bounced violently over the rough terrain, threatening to overturn with each bump and dip in the dusty trail. Baby Emma whimpered against her, somehow sensing the danger despite her innocence. "We've got you now, lady," one of the men shouted, his voice carrying over the rumble of hooves. "Ain't nowhere to run." Lillian's eyes frantically scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of salvation in the vast expanse of Colorado wilderness. The mountains loomed in the distance, but she knew she'd never make it to their shelter. Her wagon crested a small hill, and she saw it a small ranch nestled in the valley below. Hope flickered in her chest. "Just a little further," she pleaded, steering her horse toward the distant buildings. The bandits were closing in, barely 50 yards behind now. Lillian could hear their laughter, cold and cruel. They were enjoying the chase, like wolves playing with their prey before the kill. "Stop that wagon or we'll shoot your horse," another bandit called out, and Lillian knew they meant it. If her horse went down, she and Emma would be completely at their mercy. As the ranch grew closer, Lillian spotted a lone figure in the yard, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding. A tall man wearing a Stetson was chopping wood, his back turned to the approaching chaos. "Help!" she screamed with all the force her lungs could muster. "Please help us." The man turned, dropping his axe immediately as he took in the scene. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the small cabin, disappearing inside momentarily before emerging with a rifle in his hands. Jacob Donovan had been expecting an ordinary day on his modest ranch outside Alamosa. At 30 years old, he'd built this place with his own hands after years of driving cattle and drifting from town to town. The last thing he expected was to find himself in the middle of what looked like a pursuit. But there was no mistaking what he was seeing for rough-looking men chasing a terrified woman who was clutching something to her chest. Jacob raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack echoed across the valley. "That's far enough," he shouted, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who meant business. The bandits pulled their horses to a halt about 100 yards from the ranch house, clearly reassessing the situation now that an armed man stood in their path. The woman's wagon continued toward the ranch, her horse slowing from exhaustion as it approached. "This ain't your concern, mister," the lead bandit called out. He was a burly man with a thick black beard and cold eyes. "We've got business with the lady." "Any business that involves chasing a woman across the countryside is my concern," Jacob replied, stepping forward to position himself between the approaching wagon and the bandits. "I suggest you turn around and find somewhere else to be." Lillian pulled her wagon to a stop behind Jacob, her breathing ragged and her face streaked with dust and tears. The baby in her arms had begun to cry openly now, a piercing wail that cut through the tension. "You're outnumbered," the lead bandit said, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "4 against 1 ain't good odds." "Depends on the one," Jacob responded coolly. He hadn't survived this long in the West by backing down from threats. "Now, I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully." The bandits exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Jacob could see the calculation in their eyes was whatever they wanted from the woman worth dying for. "We'll be back," the leader finally spat, jerking his horse around. "This ain't over." Jacob kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the ridge, then quickly turned to the woman in the wagon. She was young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair that had partially escaped from its pins during the chase. Her dress was dusty but of good quality, and the infant in her arms had quieted to soft whimpers. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, approaching the wagon slowly so as not to startle her further. Lillian shook her head, though her entire body was trembling. "No, but they would have, if you hadn't." She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking with emotion. "You're safe now," Jacob assured her, offering his hand to help her down from the wagon. "Let me help you inside. Your horse needs rest, and by the looks of it, so do you and your little one." Lillian hesitated only briefly before accepting his help. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her as she stepped down, the adrenaline that had kept her going now fading rapidly. "My name is Jacob Donovan," he said, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Lillian Vance," she replied, adjusting her hold on the baby. "And this is Emma." Jacob led them toward the cabin, pausing to unhitch her exhausted horse. "I'll get your horse some water and feed after I get you settled inside. Those men might come back, and I'd rather you both be safely indoors." The inside of Jacob's cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small cooking area beside it. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat in the center of the main room, and through a partially open door, Lillian could see a neatly made bed. "Please sit," Jacob said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll make some coffee and you can tell me what that was all about, if you're up to it." Lillian sank gratefully into the chair, cradling Emma against her shoulder and gently patting her back to soothe her. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Donovan." "Jacob, please." He moved efficiently around the small space, stoking the fire and setting a coffee pot to heat. "And no thanks are necessary. I couldn't exactly stand by and watch." As Jacob busied himself with the coffee, Lillian took a moment to study her rescuer. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and strong hands that spoke of years of hard work. His face was weathered by the sun but handsome, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he spoke. His light brown hair was a touch too long, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. "I was traveling to Alamosa," Lillian explained after a moment, her voice steadier now. "My sister lives there with her husband. I've been staying with them since." She paused, the pain still fresh. "Since my husband passed 6 months ago." Jacob's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Vance." "Lillian," she corrected gently. "And thank you. Thomas was a good man." He never even got to meet Emma. She looked down at her daughter, who had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from the ordeal. Jacob poured coffee into 2 cups and set one before Lillian. "What brought you out alone? It's dangerous country for a woman traveling by herself, especially with a little one." "I had business in Denver," Lillian explained. "Thomas left some mining investments that needed attention. I thought I could make the journey back to Alamosa in a day if I started early enough." She shook her head, angry at herself. "It was foolish." "Those men," Jacob said, taking a seat across from her. "Did you know them?" Lillian shook her head. "No. They appeared about an hour ago, riding alongside my wagon. At first, they just made crude remarks, but then they started talking about how a pretty widow like me must have inherited money or valuables." Her voice hardened. "When I told them to leave me be, they decided they weren't taking no for an answer." Jacob's jaw tightened. "There's been a gang causing trouble in these parts, robbing travelers, terrorizing isolated homesteads. The sheriff in Alamosa has been trying to organize a posse to go after them." "Do you think it was them?" Lillian asked, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. "Could be," Jacob admitted, "which means they might well come back, especially if they think you're carrying something valuable." As if on cue, Emma stirred and began to fuss. Lillian adjusted her position, trying to comfort her. "Here," Jacob said, standing and moving to a trunk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a small blanket and brought it over. "It's clean. Might make her more comfortable." Lillian accepted the blanket with surprise. "Do you have children, Mr. Jacob?" A shadow passed over his face. "No. That belonged to my sister's little one. They stayed with me for a time last year before moving on to California." Lillian wrapped Emma in the soft blanket, and the baby settled immediately, her tiny fist clutching the fabric. "She likes it," Lillian said with a small smile, the first one Jacob had seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing warmth to her tired eyes, and Jacob found himself momentarily captivated. He cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "I should see to your horse and bring in your things from the wagon. It'll be dark soon." Outside, Jacob took a moment to survey the surrounding landscape, searching for any sign of the bandits. The evening was quiet, but he knew better than to let his guard down. After tending to Lillian's horse and securing it in the small stable alongside his own, he unloaded her trunk and few belongings from the wagon. By the time he returned to the cabin, Lillian had managed to change and feed Emma using supplies from a small bag she'd kept with her. She'd also found his pantry and was preparing what appeared to be a simple stew. "You don't have to cook," Jacob protested, setting her trunk down near the wall. "Please," Lillian said firmly. "It's the least I can do after you saved us." Jacob didn't argue further, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. Instead, he moved to the window, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. "You can have the bed tonight," he said after a moment. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Lillian paused in her cooking. "I can't put you out of your bed." "It's no trouble," Jacob assured her. "I've slept in far worse places than my own floor." They ate dinner in companionable silence, the stew warming them against the evening chill that had settled over the cabin. Emma slept peacefully in a makeshift bed Jacob had created from a drawer lined with blankets. "Tomorrow I can take you into Alamosa," Jacob offered as they finished their meal. "It's about 3 hours' ride from here." Lillian nodded gratefully. "My sister will be worried. I was expected yesterday." "We'll leave at first light," Jacob promised. "It'll be safer traveling together." That night, despite Jacob's insistence that she take the bed, Lillian found sleep elusive. The day's events kept replaying in her mind, and every creak of the cabin in the night wind made her start with fear. Emma, mercifully, slept soundly in her drawer bed beside her. Outside in the main room, Jacob sat in a chair by the window, his rifle across his knees. He told Lillian he would sleep by the fire, but in truth, he had no intention of sleeping. Those bandits had seemed too determined to simply give up, and Jacob's years on the frontier had taught him to trust his instincts. Tonight, those instincts were screaming that danger wasn't far off. Shortly after midnight, his vigilance was rewarded. A soft sound outside caught his attention, the almost imperceptible crunch of boots on gravel. Moving silently to the window, Jacob peered out into the moonlit yard. 3 shadowy figures were approaching the cabin, while a 4th appeared to be checking the stable. Jacob moved quickly to the bedroom door, knocking softly. "Lillian," he whispered urgently. The door opened immediately. She hadn't been sleeping either. Her eyes widened when she saw the rifle in his hands. "They're back." Jacob nodded grimly. 4 of them, same as before. "Get Emma and stay in here. Keep low and away from the windows." Lillian quickly gathered her sleeping daughter, wrapping her in the blanket Jacob had provided. Her face was pale but determined. "What are you going to do?" "Convince them to leave," Jacob replied, his voice hard. "One way or another." Before she could respond, a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there, mister. Send out the woman and her valuables, and we'll be on our way." Jacob positioned himself beside the window, careful to stay out of sight. "There's nothing for you here," he shouted back. "The lady doesn't have anything worth dying for." A harsh laugh answered him. "That's for us to decide. You've got 1 minute before we start shooting." Jacob turned to Lillian, who stood clutching Emma in the bedroom doorway. "Is there anything in your trunk they might want? Anything valuable at all?" Lillian shook her head helplessly. "Only clothes and personal items. The papers from the mine investments, but they're worthless now. The mine played out months ago, that's what I learned in Denver." Jacob's mind raced. These men were clearly convinced Lillian was carrying something of value, and they weren't going to be persuaded otherwise without proof. 30 seconds, the voice outside called. "I need to draw them away from the cabin," Jacob said quickly. "If I can get them to follow me, you take Emma and hide in the root cellar out back. There's a trapdoor behind the pantry." "No," Lillian protested, her eyes wide with fear. "They'll kill you." "I know this land better than they do," Jacob assured her. "It's our best chance." Before she could argue further, a shot rang out, shattering the window beside them. Jacob pushed Lillian back into the bedroom just as another bullet splintered the doorframe. "Time's up," the bandit leader shouted. "We're coming in." Jacob positioned himself behind the heavy wooden table, which he'd overturned for cover. "Last warning," he called out. "The next man who tries to enter this cabin will be shot." The answer was another volley of gunfire that tore through the cabin's thin walls. Jacob waited until there was a pause in the shooting, then rose quickly and fired 2 shots through the broken window. A cry of pain told him at least one had found its mark. "You'll pay for that," someone shouted, fury evident in the voice. Jacob used the moment to dart across to the back door. If he could slip out and circle around, he might be able to get behind them. "Lillian," he whispered urgently, "get to the cellar now. I'm going to draw their fire away from the cabin." Lillian appeared in the bedroom doorway, Emma clutched tightly to her chest. The baby had awakened with the gunfire and was crying softly. "Be careful," Lillian pleaded, her eyes meeting Jacob's in the dim light. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Jacob nodded once, then slipped out the back door into the night. The cool air hit him immediately as he crouched low, using the shadows to conceal his movement. He could hear the bandits conferring in harsh whispers at the front of the cabin. Moving silently around the side of the building, Jacob positioned himself behind the water trough, where he had a clear view of the men. There were only 3 visible now. One was clutching his arm, blood darkening his sleeve that would be the one Jacob had hit. The 4th was nowhere to be seen, which worried Jacob considerably. Had he circled around to the back of the cabin? Making a split-second decision, Jacob stood and fired into the air. "Over here!" he shouted, then turned and ran toward the stable. As he'd hoped, the 3 men immediately gave chase, firing wildly as they pursued him. Jacob ducked into the stable, then out the back, racing toward the cover of a small grove of trees nearby. If he could draw them far enough from the cabin, Lillian would have time to reach the root cellar safely. Inside the cabin, Lillian moved quickly as soon as Jacob disappeared. With Emma whimpering against her shoulder, she found the trapdoor Jacob had mentioned and pulled it open. The earthen stairs descended into darkness. For a moment, she hesitated. The black void below seemed terrifying, but then another gunshot echoed outside, galvanizing her into action. Carefully cradling Emma, Lillian descended into the cellar, pulling the trapdoor closed above them. The darkness was absolute, and she felt her way cautiously down the remaining steps. The cellar smelled of earth and stored vegetables, and the air was cool and damp. "Shoo, sweet girl," Lillian whispered, rocking Emma gently. "We need to be very quiet now." Above her, Lillian heard the cabin door crash open and heavy footsteps move across the floor. The fourth bandit had entered the cabin while his companions chased Jacob. Lillian froze, hardly daring to breathe as the footsteps moved around the small space. "Where are you, woman?" a gruff voice called out. "I know you're in here somewhere." Lillian pressed herself against the earthen wall of the cellar, silently praying that Emma wouldn't cry out. The footsteps approached the pantry, pausing directly above the trapdoor. A board creaked ominously. Outside, Jacob had led the three bandits into the trees, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay just ahead of them. He'd managed to circle back toward the cabin, intending to come up behind them, when he realized with horror that the fourth man wasn't with the group. He must have stayed behind to search for Lillian. Jacob changed direction immediately, racing back toward the cabin. He had to reach Lillian before the remaining bandit found her and Emma. He approached the cabin from the rear, moving silently up to a back window. Through the broken glass, he could see a tall, thin man moving methodically through the small space, checking every possible hiding place. The man was approaching the pantry, where the entrance to the root cellar was hidden. Without hesitation, Jacob burst through the back door, his rifle leveled at the intruder. "Don't move," he commanded. The bandit whirled around, his hand flying to his holstered pistol. Jacob didn't give him time to draw. He fired once, the shot catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him backward against the wall. The bandit's pistol clattered to the floor as he slumped down, clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing. Jacob kicked the fallen pistol away and quickly bound the man's hands with a length of rope from the kitchen. "Where are your friends?" he demanded. The wounded bandit glared up at him with hatred. "They'll kill you when they get back. You're dead, mister." A sound from outside answered Jacob's question before the bandit could say more. The remaining three men had heard the gunshot and were returning to the cabin. "Lillian," Jacob called softly, moving toward the pantry. "It's me. Are you down there?" The trapdoor opened slightly, and Lillian's pale face appeared. "Jacob, you're alive." "For now," he replied grimly. "But we've got trouble coming. Stay down there with Emma. Don't come up until I call for you, no matter what you hear. Understand?" Lillian nodded, her eyes wide with fear, then disappeared back into the cellar as Jacob closed the trapdoor. He moved swiftly to position himself by the window, preparing for the final confrontation. The bandits approached cautiously, using the darkness for cover. Jacob could see their shadows moving across the moonlit yard, spreading out to surround the cabin. "We got your woman, mister." One of them called out a bluff Jacob knew but designed to draw him out. Jacob remained silent, watching as they inched closer to the cabin. He needed to end this now before they could regroup and mount a more coordinated attack. Taking careful aim through the broken window, Jacob fired at the nearest shadow. The man cried out and fell, but the other two immediately returned fire, forcing Jacob to duck back behind the wall. Bullets tore through the thin wooden walls of the cabin, sending splinters flying in all directions. In the brief lull that followed, Jacob heard the wounded bandit he'd left tied up begin to laugh. "You're trapped in here with us now, cowboy," he taunted. "No way out." Jacob ignored him, focusing instead on the movements outside. One of the remaining bandits was attempting to circle around to the back of the cabin. Jacob moved quickly to cover the rear door, firing as soon as a shadow appeared in the doorway. There was a grunt of pain, followed by the sound of a body hitting the ground. That left only one, the leader, the most dangerous of them all. "It's just you and me now," the leader called from somewhere in the darkness. "Let's end this like men. You step out, I step out, and we settle this proper." Jacob knew better than to trust the word of a bandit. "You want me? Come and get me," he shouted back. Silence fell over the scene, broken only by the groans of the wounded men. Jacob moved carefully from window to window, trying to spot the leader in the darkness. The minutes stretched endlessly, the tension building with each passing moment. Then, without warning, the front door exploded inward as the leader charged through, firing wildly. Jacob rolled to the side, returning fire from behind the overturned table. The leader dove behind a chair, bullets splintering the wood around him. "You're good," the leader acknowledged, reloading his pistol. "But I've killed better men than you." "Not today," Jacob replied, taking careful aim as the leader leaned out to fire again. Their shots rang out simultaneously. Jacob felt a searing pain along his side as the leader's bullet grazed him, but his own shot found its mark. The bandit leader staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he clutched his chest. He took 2 more faltering steps before collapsing to the floor. The sudden silence was deafening. Jacob moved cautiously toward the fallen leader, kicking his gun away before checking for signs of life. There were none. Grimacing at the pain in his side, Jacob quickly secured the wounded bandit who remained inside the cabin, then checked on the 2 outside. One was dead, but the other was merely wounded and quickly surrendered when Jacob approached. "It's over, Lillian," Jacob called, returning to the pantry and opening the trapdoor. "You can come up now. It's safe." Lillian emerged from the cellar, Emma still clutched protectively to her chest. Her eyes widened when she saw the blood staining Jacob's shirt. "You're hurt. It's just a graze," he assured her, though the pain was becoming more intense. "Nothing serious." Lillian wasn't convinced. Setting Emma down in her makeshift bed, she insisted on examining Jacob's wound. "Sit," she ordered, her tone brooking no argument. Jacob complied, sinking gratefully into a chair as Lillian gathered clean cloths and water. With gentle hands, she cleaned the wound, which was indeed only a graze, though deep enough to require bandaging. "You saved our lives," Lillian said softly as she worked. "Again." Jacob winced slightly as she applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "I couldn't let them hurt you or Emma." Lillian's hands paused momentarily, and she looked up to meet his gaze. "Why? You don't even know us." Jacob considered the question. Why had he risked his life for this woman and her child? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to either of you." Something shifted in Lillian's expression, a softening, a recognition. She finished bandaging his wound in silence, her touch lingering perhaps longer than necessary. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "First light, we'll load these men onto horses and take them into Alamosa," Jacob replied. "The sheriff there will want to deal with them." Lillian nodded, moving to check on Emma, who had fallen back asleep despite the chaos. "And after that?" Jacob watched her, seeing the strength in her that had allowed her to survive not only the loss of her husband but also the terror of this night. "After that? Well, that depends on you, I suppose." "On me." Lillian turned back to face him, uncertainty in her eyes. "You said you were staying with your sister," Jacob said cautiously. Is that where you want to be?" Lillian looked around the small cabin, which despite the damage from the gunfight, still somehow felt safe. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been drifting since Thomas died, not really belonging anywhere. My sister has been kind, but her house is small, and her husband. He tolerates our presence more than welcomes it." Jacob stood slowly, mindful of his injury, and moved to stand before her. "This place isn't much," he said, gesturing around the cabin. "But it's mine. It's peaceful, most days at least." A small smile tugged at his lips. There's room here if you and Emma wanted to stay. For a while at least, until you figure out what's next. Lillian's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or ulterior motive, but found only honest offer. Why would you do that for us? Jacob took a deep breath. Because in just one day, you've made this place feel more like a home than it has in all the years I've lived here. Because when I saw you in danger, I knew I'd do anything to keep you safe. Because... He hesitated, then continued more softly. Because I think I could care for you, Lillian Vance, if you'd give me the chance. Lillian's eyes widened at his words, a flush rising to her cheeks. We barely know each other, she protested weakly. I know, Jacob acknowledged, and I'm not asking for promises. Just time. Time to see if what I'm feeling might be something you could feel too. Lillian looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully despite everything that had happened. She needs stability, she murmured. A safe place to grow up. I can offer that, Jacob said quietly. To both of you. Lillian was silent for a long moment, weighing his words and the feelings stirring within her own heart. There was something about this man, his quiet strength, his unwavering honor, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at Emma. Something that made her wonder if perhaps fate had guided her to his doorstep for a reason. A month, she said finally, looking up at him with a small smile. We'll stay for a month. See how it goes. Relief and joy spread across Jacob's face. A month it is, he agreed, taking her hand in his. Though I suspect I already know how it will go. The dawn broke clear and bright over the Colorado mountains. Jacob and Lillian, with Emma securely wrapped and nestled in her mother's arms, rode into Alamosa with the surviving bandits in tow. The sheriff was astounded to learn they had captured members of the notorious Reeves gang, who had been terrorizing the territory for months. There's a reward, the sheriff informed them after the prisoners were secured in the jail. $500 for the gang. Jacob looked to Lillian, who nodded slightly. Use it to help the families they've hurt, Jacob told the sheriff. We don't need it. They stopped briefly at Lillian's sister's house, where her sister Martha was indeed frantic with worry. Lillian explained what had happened and her decision to stay with Jacob for a time. Are you certain? Martha asked privately, eyeing Jacob suspiciously. You hardly know him. Lillian watched as Jacob stood on the porch, gently rocking Emma in his arms. The baby had taken to him immediately, quieting whenever he held her. I'm certain enough to try, she replied softly. He risked his life for us, Martha, and there's something between us. Something I haven't felt since Thomas. Martha's expression softened. Well, you know where to find me if you need me. They collected the rest of Lillian's belongings and returned to Jacob's ranch that afternoon. Over the following weeks, they fell into an easy routine. Jacob taught Lillian about ranch life, and she brought organization and warmth to his bachelor existence. They repaired the cabin together, making it stronger and more comfortable. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains as Emma babbled and played at their feet. 1 month stretched into 2, then 3. Lillian's reserved smiles became more frequent, her laughter filling the once quiet cabin. Jacob found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to make her laugh, to see the light dance in her eyes. On a crisp autumn evening, 6 months after Lillian and Emma had arrived at his ranch, Jacob took Lillian for a walk to the small pond on his property. The setting sun painted the water gold and crimson, and wildflowers still bloomed along its banks despite the approaching winter. I've been thinking, Jacob said as they stood side by side, watching the water ripple in the gentle breeze. A dangerous pastime, Lillian teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Jacob chuckled, taking her hand in his. Perhaps, but these thoughts have been with me for some time now. He turned to face her fully. The month you agreed to has long since passed, Lillian. Her expression grew serious. Are you asking us to leave? No, Jacob said quickly, squeezing her hand. God, no. The opposite, in fact. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I'm asking you to stay, permanently, as my wife. Lillian's breath caught, her eyes widening. Jacob, I love you, Lillian, he continued, the words flowing now that he'd begun. I love Emma as if she were my own daughter. These past months with you both have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but I know what I feel, and I hope you might feel the same. Tears filled Lillian's eyes, but her smile was radiant. I do, she whispered. I love you too, Jacob. I think I began falling for you the moment you stood between us and those bandits, not even knowing who we were. Jacob pulled her gently into his arms, his heart soaring. Is that a yes, then? Will you marry me? Lillian laughed, a sound of pure joy. Yes, she said, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Donovan. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Alamosa. Emma, now nearly 10 months old, sat contentedly in Martha's lap, dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's simple but elegant wedding gown. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, the story of their meeting having become something of a local legend. As they exchanged vows, Jacob made a special promise to Emma as well, vowing to love and protect her as his own daughter for all his days. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when he knelt to place a tiny ring on her finger alongside the one he gave Lillian. Life on the ranch flourished with Lillian's capable management and Jacob's hard work. They expanded the cabin, adding rooms for their growing family. Emma's first word was Papa, which she proclaimed proudly while reaching for Jacob, bringing tears to his eyes. 2 years later, Lillian gave birth to a son they named Thomas Jacob, honoring both the past and the present. Emma adored her little brother, appointing herself his special protector and helper. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Jacob surprised Lillian with a new rocking chair for the porch, handcrafted from the finest wood he could find. That evening, as they sat together watching their children play in the yard, Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder. Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out if I hadn't been chased by those bandits that day? She asked softly. Jacob's arm tightened around her shoulders. I believe we would have found each other somehow, he replied. Some things are simply meant to be. Lillian smiled, knowing he was right. What had begun in danger and desperation had blossomed into a love deeper and richer than either of them could have imagined. As the sun set over their home and their children's laughter filled the air, Lillian offered a silent prayer of gratitude for bandits, brave cowboys, and second chances at love.